Voting is a civic duty. Let's register on the electoral list. This is a message from Equinoxe Television.
6 p.m. in Douala. It's time for the news in the English language on Equinoxe Television. Thank you, viewers, for being with us tonight. Our message starts right away. In exactly 1 week, 4 days, pupils and students across Cameroon will resume classes for the new academic year. Parents have begun registering their kids so timidly, and also renovation works are going on in some educational institutions. We visited here in Douala. We will tell you more on the back-to-school fever in Douala and other parts of Cameroon in this news edition. And still on back-to-school, security and local authorities of the Southwest region are seeking ways to ensure that the academic year resume hitch-free in conflict areas. A security and a sectorial meeting of the Southwest to that effect took place recently in Mudeka in the Tiko subdivision and was presided over by Governor Bernard Kalabila of the Southwest region alongside forces of law and order. Viewers, those are our major stories. Details when we come back. Welcome back, viewers. Thank you so much for the confidence. We begin with back-to-school preparations across the national territory. In Boya, in the Southwest region, back-to-school preparations are yet to gain steam or momentum as parents complain of economic hardship and the hike in prices of school gadgets. Our reporter, Lucy Liengo Esie, was at the Great Support Market in Boya, where she spoke with some parents and also some traders.
As the 2024-2025 academic year approaches, the financial burden is weighing heavily on many households. As a result, the ambience in markets in Boya in the Southwest region is still very timid. Here at the OIC Market Great Support, traders selling school bags, books, and other school gadgets say business is very slow as parents complain of a surge in prices.
Business has just been there, like customers are not coming that way. Yeah, even the ones that are coming, that like how much they will see the price and they'll say we'll come back later.
With the security situation of the region, parents say they are struggling to make ends meet.
I bought some books and some bags, but we are buying gradually. We cannot buy at once. We buy shoes maybe next week, we buy books. We cannot buy all things at once so that it will not be too difficult for us.
As the business is slow, we have to take time for buying the school things for children.
Because there is not money now, but I believe by next week, till we happen, I will buy them.
Other traders at the OIC Market Great Support blame the situation to the recent destruction of structures in the market following an accident that occurred weeks back.
This year and last year, this year is not the best. This year is slow. Because last year there was no destruction in the market as they destroyed this market like that. We are really feel bad because there's no customer. We struggle to catch up. There's no way.
Meantime, parents hope in few days they will be able to make ends meet so as to satisfy their children's need.
And last-minute preparations are being done ahead of official kickoff of the new academic year that would be on September 9, 2024 across the national territory. Visiting some schools in Douala, reporter Immaculate Fogo explains that most of the school buildings have been given a new facelift. Her report.
The buildings of Government Bilingual High School Bojongo in Bonaberry, Douala 4 subdivision undergoing refurbishment. The walls are being painted, classrooms cleaned, and the lawn being trimmed ahead of official school resumption. While at Government Practicing Primary School Sodiko, still in Bonaberry, we are informed by the teachers that everything is set.
Doing some cleanings, arranging 1 or 2 things, preparing for the the exact date on the 9th that schools are supposed to resume.
Same effervescence in some private institutions, as technicians could be seen on campus painting the walls, trimming the lawns, with others trying to fix one thing or the other. Even teachers are currently on campus. The goal is to ensure that the environment is suitable for learning.
It's almost 1 week to back to school. The pedagogy of the school has been done. Painting is going on. The environment is being taken care of. Everything is ready. We are ready for back to school.
We have already started preparations. So the commencement of schooling in 1 week time by doing some kind of renovations with our classrooms, drawing up of timetables, drawing of terms program of activity that was given by the minister's decree, and then there is ongoing admission.
While on our tour in these different institutions, the few parents who came to register their kids raised concerns on the high cost of living, which is making it difficult for them to fully attend to their children's needs.
Our system of education and the money paid before education is highly demanding because there is no particular books required because each school will be asking for its own book list. Had it been that we have a general book list for students, it will make things easier for parents.
As the school year starts come September 9, ensuring that the school environment is clean, serene and calm remains a major preoccupation.
This week and next week, many parents and students will be returning from holidays to resume classes that should be on September 9, and road accidents should be avoided at all costs. Unfortunately, the rate of road accidents, especially on the road linking terminus around roundabout and the Douala International Airport, has increased because of the damaged footbridge, which before now enabled pedestrians to cross the road in safety. 2 children were recently killed by high-speeding vehicles on that road. Babula Jonathan now tells us more about the street.
A roadway littered with piles of iron pieces. Fast traffic is a constant danger here. It has now been nearly 2 months since this footbridge was destroyed by a heavy-duty truck. Crossing this section of the road connecting the Saint-Michel terminus roundabout to the Douala International Airport has become difficult for both children and adults. They are obliged to run across the road to avoid being hit by a vehicle or a motorbike.
There are so many accidents that are happening here. Most people come here at times you see vehicles coming with very high speed. They don't have, they were so improved speed brakes here so that when vehicles are coming, they can slow down, but not speed brakes. Most of us, when we know something about security, we used to cross over here. But now that this flyover is down, we're having so many problems to cross.
With the start of the school year approaching, parents are increasingly worried about their children. When we visited the site Monday, we observed workers at work. Although they could not speak to us, one of the officials of the Douala City Council told us off camera they had just started the rehabilitation work. He adds that all the iron plates and bars will be cut out to build a new footbridge on another site. Since the destruction of this infrastructure, the rate of accidents has increased on this section of the city's road network. 2 children were recently killed in an accident here. The Saint-Michel roundabout, a strategic point connecting several roads, including the one leading to the Douala International Airport, is in a deplorable state.
Now let's talk security or insecurity. 4 suspected fraudsters have been apprehended and presented to the press by elements of the territorial gendarmerie of Ufundi in the Central region. They have been accused of impersonating the technical advisor at the presidency. Gendarme or investigations by gendarme officers showed that they were assisted in their crime by sacked military officers. Smart Jikan Gabriel has details.
There were 4 suspected fraudsters, amongst them a lady and a physically disabled man, who were presented at the esplanade of the Territorial Gendarmerie Office of Mfundi, Yaounde. They have been accused of fraudulently extorting money from innocent civilians using the name of the technical advisor at the Presidency of the Republic, General Fuda.
We went and arrested that so-called Mbapu Parfemina in his house at Bastos. And while searching his house, we discovered a lot of evidences. There are those documents that were written and signed, addressed either to the head of state or to the special advisor, Rear Admiral Fuda, but they were fake ones.
In the course of the search in the house of a suspect, the gendarmes also discovered other items.
They were in the counterfeit of money and coins, not on coin, because we discovered 408 banknotes of $50 each in his house. While searching in his phone, we discovered that it was an organized criminal system.
The underground operations of these suspects was a success because they used a sacked official of the Ministry of Defense to threaten most of their victims. Some popular social media personalities were also used by the suspects.
They also had Patrice Numa in the US, or Boris Berthold in France, with whom they were connected, and they were the ones to alarm the public when the victims were not willing to pay.
The 4 will face a military prosecutor with immediate effect to answer to offenses leveled against them, which includes false pretense, defamation, and the buying and selling alongside distribution of military assets and tools, which is contained in Law 82/19.
Over to the DRC, where the death penalty hovers around 50 people, including 3 Americans, for the attempted coup d'etat of May 19 in that country. Let's now have the details with Cedric Chakutio.
Prosecutors on Tuesday called for 50 people, including 3 Americans, to face the death penalty for what the Congolese army says was a coup attempt earlier this year. Military prosecutor Lieutenant Colonel Innocent Rajubu urged the judges to sentence to death all those on trial except for 1 defendant who suffers from psychological problems. The defendants, whose trial opened in June, face a number of charges, many punishable by death, including terrorism, murder, and criminal association. Remember, 6 people were killed during the botched coup attempt led by the little-known opposition figure Christian Malanga that targeted the presidential palace and a close ally of President Felix Tshisekedi. Malanga was fatally shot for resisting arrest soon after live-streaming the attack on his social media. Malanga's 21-year-old son, Marcel Malanga, who is a U.S. citizen, and 2 other Americans are on trial for their alleged role in the attack. His mother, Brittany Soya, says her son is innocent and simply followed his father, who considered himself president of a shadow government in exile.
And that does it for the first part of the news. Let's now move on to Talking Point. Welcome back, viewers. Today we will be talking about food poisoning or food intoxication with our guest, Hansen Loretta Gary. He is a food storage technologist. We remember that yesterday we had a report from Edea where a child died after consuming nuts which were offered them by their grandmother. Another child is battling for her life here in Douala after consuming same nuts offered her or them by their grandmother. Some time ago, we also had another story from the East region where 6 people died from food poisoning. Now we will have to be talking more on how to store food in our homes. Our guest, like I mentioned a while ago, is a food storage technologist. Hansen, thank you so much for being our guest tonight. Like recently, we have had cases of food intoxication, especially within the family setting. Now, as someone who has done some studies in food storage technologies, what can be some of the possible causes of involuntary food poisoning or food intoxication in homes?
Good evening, and good evening, fellow viewers of Equinoxe television I'm very, very glad this evening to come before you to give presentations on issues that have to do with food contamination and food poisoning. Especially these days that in our country, almost every week we have cases of people dying because they have consumed a particular food. And maybe most of the time we associate it to intentional poisoning, but most of the time what we know is that it is caused by either natural or synthetic chemicals that have unintentionally gotten into our foods. Yeah, so the main causes that we have of this unintentional food poisoning, we have two main causes. We have synthetic chemicals that most of the time we use them in crop production and food storage. Like at level of crop production, we know that we have chemicals that we use them to do weeding, we use them to as fungicides to prevent growth of fungi and so on our crops. These chemicals, if we don't use them well, they can have their way into our foods, and then it will bring about food contamination and it can lead to death. The second case has to do with natural toxic substances that are found in some food. For example, we already know the one of cassava, which we call cyanine, and many of us can prevent that one. But there are other ones that are caused by mold, known as mycotoxins. These ones, we don't really know much about them, and most of the time, we consume food that have been contaminated with these chemicals, and it can lead to death.
Now, Hansen, we are assuming that most of those cases were involuntary, meaning they weren't done intentionally, like the case of the grandchildren who died after consuming palm nuts offered them by their grandmom. Is there a possibility that they might have consumed another or other foodstuffs before or after consuming the palm nuts, which might have led to their systems being poisoned?
Yeah, if like the case where we had a grandmother gave palm nuts to the children and the children ate the palm nuts and died. Yeah, the question is whether they had consumed some other foodstuff before consuming the palm nuts, or it's the palm nuts that caused their deaths. Where all the two possibilities can explain what happened. The first scenario where we assume that they had consumed some other food, maybe rich in synthetic chemicals or these natural toxic substances that could have equally led to their death. And the second case where we talk of palm nuts, we know that many of these natural toxic substances, they like growing on oil-rich substrates. So, which means that these palm nuts could have equally been a good substrate for their growth, and if they grow on this substrate, they can likely produce these toxic substances that if these children eat, they can equally die. So in many cases, most oil-rich substances like granite and others have the tendency to act as good substrates to this mold known as fungi that can equally produce this secondary metabolites known as mycotoxins. But we should note that not all these fungi produce these natural toxic substances. Only a few of them do, but we will not know which one produce it only by looking at them with our naked eyes. So it needs a lot of studies to be able to identify these chemicals, but we can avoid consuming food that are moldy. Then this is going to help us to guide us so that we understand how we can prevent ourselves from contamination of these chemicals.
Now, Mr. Hansen, let's try to be very clear so those who are watching us in the house can understand us better. Can inappropriate storage of food items cause fatal food poisoning or intoxication? If yes, how?
The answer is yes, because we know that the way you store your food can determine whether these chemicals will be part of the food. The first one has to do with synthetic chemicals. All of us know that many people are these days use synthetic chemicals mostly to drive out weevils and other insects from the food. So most often, some of them may not follow the dosage that they have been asked to add to the food, and that one can lead to food contamination. Also, some people may store the food and it will not reach the number of months that they have asked them to store the food before consuming. they will start consuming it. Mostly when people have lost their loved ones, they don't have any other option than to go back to the food that they have stored that is not up to 3 months. So this one can lead to food contamination. The second case has to do with the presence of natural chemicals. If you don't store your food very well, these natural chemicals are going to be part of your food. And remember, as I said earlier, these natural chemicals are produced by fungi, mostly as what we call secondary metabolites. That is, they produce these chemicals just like other mushroom that we don't consume. They produce these chemicals so that maybe as a way of defense. So often, what happens is that when these chemicals are produced, the chemicals are toxic to humans. And if for you to store your food such that these chemicals will not be part of it, you need to practice what we call hematic storage. That is, you store your food in such a way that oxygen will not be part of the food. Since most of these microorganisms known as fungi, they grow well in the presence of oxygen. So if we store our food in synthetic medium, in a hematic medium, it's going to prevent the growth of these fungi. And when these fungi do not grow, we will not have these toxins that are produced. So the other thing too is these fungi, they behave exactly like these poisonous mushrooms. We know that not all mushrooms are poisonous. We have some that are poisonous. These poisonous mushrooms are poisonous because they produce these chemicals known as mycotoxins. And these are younger relatives known as these lower fungi that we cannot even see with our naked eyes. They equally produce this secondary metabolite, but not all of them do it. And also the same as we don't have, not all mushrooms produce these mycotoxins. So in this case, we will conclude that if you want to store your food well, you should store your food without the use of chemicals and store it under hematic conditions. That is, you use airtight containers or airtight medium to store your food. And in this case, you will not have natural chemicals or synthetic chemicals contamination.
Hansen Loretta Gary, you are a PhD student in post-harvest physiology and storage technology. Now, can you tell us what attitudes do you advise people at home to adopt in relation to food consumption and food storage so as to avoid food poisoning in the house?
So, because this issue of food poisoning has been recurrent, the advice we'll give to people out there to practice at home to help them to prevent this food contamination and thereby preventing food poisoning is that the first thing they are supposed to do is to avoid the use of synthetic chemicals as much as possible, especially in storage. So the main thing is that if they are even going to use synthetic chemicals, they should be very careful the way they handle it and the way they store it. We know that children can stray easily around our homes and then get to where these chemicals are, and they can eventually become part of our food, or they may equally consume the chemicals directly. The second advice we will give is that people should resort to the use of hematic storage. That is, they should store their food in closed airtight containers rather than the use of chemicals, because in closed tight containers you not only prevent contamination of these chemicals, your food retained all sensory attributes that your food is supposed to have during consumption. The color remains the same, the taste remains the same, and so many other advantages that hematic storage have over storage, open air storage, that can equally lead to breeding of fungi on the food, eventually producing these natural mycotoxins. Or if we use synthetic chemicals, the synthetic chemicals is just going to help us to drive out weevils. The taste of the food and other sensory attributes of the food will equally be lost during storage. So we advise that we should use hematic storage as the way forward, rather than use of chemicals or just storing our food in the open air, because in the open air it will encourage the growth of mycotoxins, since fungi will grow on the food and they need oxygen to grow.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen. Hope this discussion helps some people out there, because the rate at which people have died from food poisoning has been disturbing lately. Now, any last advice or word before we part company?
Yes, we can give out to fellow viewers and listeners of Equinoxe television this evening is that we should avoid the use of synthetic chemicals as much as possible, because these chemicals have both chronic and acute effects on our system. For chronic effect, you consume the food, you consume the chemicals in small quantities and the chemicals accumulate in your system, and after a long time it is going to cause harm in your system. The second one has to do with the acute effect. If you consume it in large quantities, it is going to lead to effects like purging, vomiting, and maybe even death. So we should avoid the use of these synthetic chemicals as much as possible. But if we must use them, we should follow the guidelines that are prescribed on these containers. Yeah, we know that it's challenging for maybe some of our parents to read these labels, but their children can help them to show them, guide them on what is written on the synthetic chemicals, so that they follow it, they follow the safety measures that are prescribed on it, so that we should avoid this contamination and maybe food poisoning. In the case where we use these chemicals for storage, we should make sure that we follow the length of time they have advised us to stay before consuming the food. The other thing about it is that we should equally make sure that no matter what happens, we should not consume the food when it's not up to the number of months they have asked us to store the food with the chemicals. Then the other thing has to do with natural chemicals. What advice can we give? If we see food that has mold on it, we should avoid consuming the food. Because this mold, we don't know whether it's a particular mold that can produce mycotoxins or not. So we should avoid consuming food that has to do with that contains mold. And then we should equally avoid consuming food, oily food, for example, granules and others that are a bit moldy, because these toxins will have their way in the food, and then it will lead to food poisoning. And then the last thing that we will say is that when you consume the food, you should consume charcoal. If you know that you are contaminated with any of these chemicals, both synthetic and natural, you should consume charcoal, because the charcoal is going to help absorb the chemicals from your system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hansen Loreto Gary, for accepting to be our guest tonight, and thank you for all the pieces of advice. Viewers, thank you so much for always being there. Thank you for the confidence. Our programs continue. Equinoxe with Search Alangotu comes up in about 27 minutes or so, and the news in the French language would be at 8 p.m. with Julien Beth. Besides, stay with us on Equinoxe Television. God willing, I will be back tomorrow same time. Bye-bye for now.